So I've called it health, homeopathy and high vitality. But I would like to just start back in 2020 when the debacle kicked off, because it was very traumatic for homeopaths or people who understand how the innate and the adaptive immune system work, if you look at it from a holistic perspective. So in 2020, when it all kicked off, I was sort of sitting open mouthed, agog at thinking, this is a nightmare. People can't be taking this seriously. They must be realizing that this is a fear mongering exercise. And I was actually in Gambia at the time watching it on 24/7 news, because I never watched the news at home, but I kept on staying in a hotel, which I'd walk through this thing and everyone was standing there looking like this. And I was going, oh my God, what's happening to the world? And then getting back to England and it all going into lockdown, we were all stunned, I think, the homeopathic world, because, of course, well, not all of us, but it was such an other way to look at health for people who work from a homeopathic perspective, because we understand that it's down to susceptibility as to how much or how likely you are and how badly you are to get something. And because of susceptibility, our entire thrust would have been to encourage everybody to get sunlight, to encourage everybody to mix, because you want to keep your microbes very rich and shared. Encourage people to eat really well. I mean, 24/7 could easily have been healthy food ideas, instead of 24/7 terror or fear mongering, which was what was, of course, meted out to us, but that was, we know, for a reason. But there were so many other things that we could have done, and so many other ways of looking at it, which weren't about fear, which were about understanding how an immune system works, and explaining that an RNA virus is actually quite weak. It would have mutated quite quickly, probably by September, to not very much more than a common cold, which, of course, all common colds are coronaviruses. And somehow this information got quickly nipped in the bud so that they could keep it going for another year until they got the money-making aspect of it ready, saving Johnson & Johnson, who were just about to be done for all their asbestos that they put in the baby powder, and saving and making this thing called Moderna, which came out of nowhere, it seemed, but Rishi managed to have got his shares in ready, etc. So we all know how that unfolded. Meanwhile, my practice was I was very lucky, because I not only had a practice where I would say at least a third of the people completely got what was going on. So they kept, making their appointments, going, Rix, hey, I don't mind coming to see you. I'm fine about it, which was lovely. And a lot of people obviously wanted to talk about it, and a lot of people were a bit scared. So I, did what I could to ensure that they understood from a homeopathic perspective how we saw what was going on. But so today, I think what I wanted to say for you all was that, yes, of course, I'm sure you understand now that it's health and vitality that's the key. And to ensure that we have health and vitality, the homeopathic philosophy comes in very useful. So homeopathy was started by a genius who has been airbrushed from history, medical history, I might say. Amazing that we have all these people in the medical history books, but you can't find Samuel Hahnemann in there, because, of course, he kind of got what the medical profession was doing, i.e. using very toxic substances, which made a certain amount of difference, but mostly caused havoc in in the body. And so then the physicians of the day were running around chasing one heavy drug, like they were using, mercury. They were using very strong constituents as drugs. For instance, antimonium. They were using silver nitrate. They were using incredibly toxic substances, which, one could say are still being used today, but in petrochemical combinations now. And so Hahnemann looked around and went, and he became a doctor very young, because he was an absolute genius and a complete polyglot. He knew about 7 languages by the time he was 20. And it was in 1742 that he was born, or 1755 he was born, and he died in 1842. So we're talking about that period of history where the Enlightenment was freaking out, going really heavy in Europe. And you have lots of people looking for new ways of medicine, new ways of science, new ways of, because the church was getting a little bit sidelined, which was very obviously important. So Hahnemann started off working out that it wasn't a great idea to be using these heavy substances on people. And he developed an understanding through having done incredible, extensive translation work on old and ancient medical texts, where he was reaching back into the Greek and Hippocrates, and sometimes even before, but right the way up to Paracelsus, and right the way up. He was the herbalists, he was translating their works. So he had this body of incredible genius thinking that he then made his own. So he then processed this information and became and came up with an idea that if you dilute and succuss, that is, you dilute and serially shake and dilute a toxic substance, might not always be toxic, it might be a herbal substance like chamomile, but you take a tincture of chamomile, which is a herbal substance, and you start to drop 1 drop in 99 drops of water and shake, and then you take a drop out of that solution and shake, you take a drop out of that. This is his idea of potentization, which turns a herbal product like chamomile in that case, but it also could be a very toxic product like mercury, into out of its toxic state and into its what he called dynamized or potentized state. And when the homeopathic pharmacies make these our remedies, it's an incredibly complex and beautifully, carefully executed thing. It's not just making a herbal medicine, although of course that is also complex. But to make a homeopathic potentized remedy, you need a proper pharmacist, or in Hahnemann's day, Hahnemann, he said, no one else can make my remedies because they don't understand what I'm doing. And he then basically, because he made the apothecaries, and the apothecary, he refused to let them make his medicines, because he said, you will do it wrong, you're not understanding what I'm doing. I'm making these vital and vibrant vibrational medicines, and I'm not having you make them, you heavy-handed apothecaries. So once you made an enemy of apothecary, it's a bit like today making an enemy of a drug company, or certainly, of the chemists, the pharmacists. It would be like today making an enemy of drug companies, really, which of course they don't love us, we don't really love them, but there is a certain carryover from the days of Samuel Hahnemann, who set the whole vibration going. And then the next enemies that I'm afraid he made were doctors, who became very jealous of him because he seemed to be doing actually rather well, and he was attracting quite rich and wealthy people. Not that he aimed to do that, but it was rich and wealthy people that could afford to travel to see a doctor who was obviously doing quite well. So he got hounded around all the way in and out of Germany until he got put in exile, kind of thing. No, he got protection. He got protection from a prince, because there were all these different little principalities and kingdoms in Germany as it was then. Probably, I forget if it's the Austro-Prussian Empire or where it was, but it's all in those areas that there were small kingdoms. And he got saved, basically, and kept very safe by a prince who put him in a very, good position and let him carry on treating people as he wished, making his own remedies as he wished. So we've always been protected slightly by the aristocracy and the royals, as we still are today. And anyway, the thing that happened at that point was then he could carry on with his writing, and this is when he really started to make a difference, writing about how he saw health and disease with all his information from his translating work, but also from his own brilliant mind. And one of the main legacies which I want to talk about in relation to this thing that happened with us being terrorized basically by the idea that there was a virus, that a respiratory virus that was going to, cause extreme havoc, is that when I treated anybody with COVID, my number one rule was don't take any paracetamol. Most of my patients knew not to anyway, and a lot of patients didn't even get it, presumably because their susceptibility was just not at that level. But for the people who did get it, my number one rule was don't please suppress any of the inflammatory process with the use of antipyretic drugs. So my big lesson from today, I hope that, when we sort of sum up, that number one thing is to allow us to understand how to be ill well. So how to do it well. And COVID was a brilliant chance for people to understand that you didn't have to be afraid if you could just get your head out of the horror stories. And if you're using remedies, you can go through any of the basically 3 or 4 stages of an acute inflammatory illness quite easily and recover quite quickly. So the main thing I had to get out of people's heads were the horror stories. Obviously, a lot of people died of fright because they'd seen all those body bags, they'd seen all those. I mean, the psychological operation, as we know, was absolutely incredible, wasn't it? Because you show people tons and tons of bodies and people collapsing in the street, which was, we found out later was actors anyway. But if you frighten people enough, they can become susceptible. That's where susceptibility really is the number one place for it. You're afraid of a cancer or an illness, and you let that enter into your whole vibrational being, you're going to become much more susceptible. So the first thing I said to people was, please do not be afraid. It's a bad flu, maybe, and not a bad flu, depending on how your susceptibility is. Your number one thing to do is to go to bed and rest, to drink plenty of water, and to take your remedy kits, which my patients mostly have or access to, 3 or 4 of the main remedies that we use. And the first remedy that most people needed was aconite. So aconite is a remedy that we use in homeopathy for the start of colds or flus that come on very suddenly. And aconite is useful in a case like that because people were also very afraid. And fear is the most oppressive thing, the most depressive thing for one's immune system. It sets our fight or flight mechanism going, and then our cortisol levels rise and our immune system becomes challenged. So, of course, that was going on the big screen, wasn't it? Everyone was getting fight or flight, because that made everybody much more susceptible, which was going to be maybe helpful for if there is this big program of world domination through illness, it's going to be important. So, number one, let's get out of fear. Let's use aconite, which is the most brilliant remedy for sudden infections, sudden coming down with a sudden cold, but it's also an excellent remedy for panics or panic attacks. And it's also a brilliant remedy for those kind of situations where you've basically been frightened and you think getting that cold draft on your neck, oh my God, it's gone to my throat, and then you are actually susceptible. So aconite was the start of the protocol, if you like, nearly always, except a lot of people weren't particularly frightened in my practice because they kind of knew, and I knew where they were at, and we won't go straight to the next stage. The next stage, one would hope, would be to build a fever. So if you think about acute illness, we call a homeopathic philosophy calls acute illness an illness that is it has a beginning, it has a prodrome, it goes quite quickly up into quite strong symptoms, and then it quite quickly goes down. That's an ideal, healthy acute illness. We can make a shape like this. If you're using remedies, you don't want to flatten the shape. That would be what you would do with an allopathic drug, or constantly lowering a fever will constantly do this to the acute triangle that you're trying to get over and down the other side. And so with a homeopathic remedies, you're trying to lessen the length of the acute illness. So you might like it to be quite a nice sharp rise up and then a nice sharp fall down. So, for instance, in my practice or with my children, they all got really strongly ill in their childhoods, and they got strongly well. And you could always see the homeopathic children, as opposed to the ones that were being treated constantly with Calpol, who got strongly ill, but then plateaued. They kept being suppressed every time their little bodies and their little innate immune system tried to learn and to build the adaptive stage of the next part of their illness. And so when you see children very heavily calpoled, they'll be very full of lots of gunk. They'll find it very hard to sleep. They're not in any kind of a good state. They're not really eating. They're restless, but they're tired. Whereas a child having a homeopathic remedy and a homeopathic acute illness will have gone right up into a high fever. You'll have given the fever remedies at the top, and you'll have given them plenty of water. You'll give them plenty of love and safety, because they don't need to be frightened either. And then the next day, the fever comes down. It might do it again the next night, and it might on a third night. But if you're not suppressing it constantly with this obsession that we have for antipyretic medications, which is Calpol or Tylenol in America, paracetamol in England for adults, you will get a much quicker return to health, back to balance. So going back to Hahnemann, he understood and encouraged encourage people to understand the importance of not suppressing little acute illnesses, because little acute illnesses really or even big acute illnesses. If you're an adult, you might be more likely to have a more complex flu-y thing than a child who might just have a what we call a developmental disease illness. So children get ill usually either they've had a shock, or they've had a big developmental step, or they've had to leave home for the first time, I go to nursery, or they've had to go to school, or they're having some problems getting bullied. They'll produce physical, marvelous, healthy symptoms in their bodies. And the idea that you suppress those is anathema to homeopaths, because when the body has moved energy from the brain or the emotional body out through the physical into a healthy little fever with a cold and with a day out in bed, a day in bed, and a day being cuddled or, loved up, that's how our little bodies, when we're children, process this kind of complex journey of growing. But with adults, it's actually the same thing. It's just in COVID, we had the chance to actually do it ourselves. We had the chance to get ill, heat up, have a brilliant fever. Don't forget, fevers kill viruses. They denature viruses or bacteria, it doesn't matter. That's why we heat up, and why the madness of the drug companies, but it's not madness because it's huge money making, brings about this whole industry on lowering fevers. And once you've got an industry based on lowering fevers, you are going to have so much more chronic illness. Because if you never get out of this state, so my picture was of the acute triangle, but once you've put the paracetamol in, the triangle plateaus out, and then it will try again to push up that fever, and then you'll get the paracetamol to balance it, to plateau it out again. And this will continue until the person either dies of exhaustion because their system has lost its way, or they become much more chronically and dangerously ill, and it will go to their kidneys, or it will go to it will even, in some cases, it will go to their glandular system, or it might even go into a whole lymphatic inflammatory illness. Basically, Hahnemann understood that if you suppress these short, sharp, and potent natural illnesses that nature makes, even though we think maybe COVID was added to a little bit by man, but nonetheless, it was a respiratory virus that our innate and adaptive immune system were ready to learn from. So the whole notion that you should be afraid of, or you should be trying to stop children from being ill, you should try and stop yourself from being ill, is all going to cause much more trouble down the block, if you like, because you're not going to have had that little thing that you needed to put you back on track. So going back to children, you'll see they get ill whenever they go to nursery, and everyone says, oh, it's because they're dealing with new bugs. Well, yeah, if you believe in the germ theory, that's true. But what COVID showed us was that it's not, they ran the whole of COVID on the germ theory. The germ theory is that there's something out there and it is trying to get you. We come from an understanding of the terrain theory, the theory that it's the soil, it's the susceptibility of the being, and that actually you strengthen the being, and whatever's out there, which for sure is eggs, there's loads and billions of microbes and viruses and bacteria, because that's how we've evolved. But you're not going to be susceptible in that way. The healthier your terrain is, the healthier your soil is. So that is where we got to it in COVID, really. We got to an absolute war if you like. Or it wasn't a war, it was a blank out of the terrain theory, the idea that it matters what state the person is in as to how ill they get. So going back just quickly to our spiking acute respiratory virus, you've got the fear, you've taken the aconite, the body now can produce the inflammatory response. Now, the inflammatory response is part of our innate immune system, but it's also part of our adaptive immune system. That is the system that has learned ever since we were born how to manage all the bacteria and viruses that we share our environment with. And our adaptive immune system is always wanting to learn. So it likes to learn new things. It likes to have new experiences, and it likes to build its muscle, if you like, by making antibodies in some cases, and certainly learning how to deal with it. The innate immune system is the bit in us that knows how to heal, that has evolved over eons. So for instance, if you cut your hand, it will grow back together if the wound is kept fairly clean. It will grow back, it will know what it's intending to do. But similarly, if your innate immune system is developing as a child, one of the most important things it needs to learn how to do is to make a fever. That is a very complex set of biological message systems involving the pituitary gland, the hypothalamus gland in the brain, and the adrenal glands on the kidneys, and turning the body, raising the basal temperature, which means we can heat up and kill bacteria or viruses, whoever we might have become susceptible to. So we have this beautiful system. We have a whole drug company that's based on an industry of lowering that fever for some reason, because of course you need a fever, because that's how you're going to kill something that might have got into your system. And then you have at the hot point of the inflammatory process, you have a body which is working hard, making loads of white blood cells, bringing swelling, bringing heat, bringing inflammation. That's why we feel ill. And that's what's so brilliant, because when we feel ill, we need to go to bed. We need to lie down. We need to drink water, lie down, shut up, stop going to work. This is the tip, if you like, of the inflammatory state. And it's really important, because if we honor that, then we know that the body will be doing its work. And at this point, we give the remedy belladonna usually. Usually belladonna is the fever remedy of choice, certainly for children. I would nearly always use that. It's when you've got the throbbing pain, you've got the head pain, you've got the eyes often don't want the light, you're very hot, but you can be shivery at the same time. You know, all those sort of hot and cold, achy, painy, head throbbing states of a high fever. And you want the fever to be as high as possible, really. I mean, adults, it's very hard to get a fever much past 101, 102. I don't know if you use 40 or whatever you use. Children can go much higher, but people don't like it. They get scared. But actually, children are designed to go much higher. And what you're doing when you take belladonna is to let the fever work its way through the body. So it's not just the head is hot and the body's cold, because that can cause a certain amount of, there's so much discrepancy between the head and the body that the cerebrospinal fluid can get a little bit stuck, and then you can get the rigors, or the shivering and the shaking that you can get from little convulsive movements. But of course, everyone's been terrorized into thinking that children's fever mustn't go past 39, and You want a good fever, and you want plenty of rest, and you want plenty of water. And at that, if everyone had been told in COVID, go to bed, drink loads of water and rest, and don't use paracetamol, it would have been over by June that year, as I said, because the healthy people would have taken it. The very sick people, unfortunately, always die every winter of flu anyway. And the people that were insisting on taking paracetamol were going to end up taking much longer to actually get well. So after the belladonna stage, you will often find you break into a sweat. Sometimes it takes a day or two. In my children, it used to go one night, and that would be the belladonna stage, and the next day their fever would be down, and they'd really be well enough to go to school. But I always said, no, you can have a day off, a duvet day, because it's good to just, convalesce. So, but for adults, we often feel a lot worse. But once you've done the sweat, you know that you're through the worst of it. You've done what used to be called breaking the fever. And at that point, your body has done this amazing thing of cascading information back, and the pituitary and the hypothalamus say to the adrenal glands, it's okay, you can lower the basal temperature again back down to 97.4. It'll be or 6. It's all good. It's all cool. And to do that, the sweat is the very important phase. So that's a wonderful stage. People, when they say, oh, I had a terrible sweat, I go, oh, well done, you've done it. Then you feel wiped out for a day, and you're usually making lots of snot, or you're then having to discharge all the white blood cells that have turned into mucousy, pussy snot. At that point, you might have a cough. You might be needing to take remedies for the cough, or you might need to be on the lemon and honey. All these things are just a phase. It's just the stage. The cough is loosening the mucus in the lungs. Everything is to clean out. Now you're just in your cleansing area. And in that, I would usually use the wonderful remedy pulsatilla, which is a remedy for a lot of mucus, especially in the nose, coughs that are worse when you lie down. All symptoms are better when you're sitting up or you're in the fresh air. Pulsatilla, they make lots of snot blocking up their noses when they're lying at night. The children that need pulsatilla are usually through the worst of the fever, and then they just want to be cuddled a lot, which is a pulsatilla state. Lots of cuddles, lots of being a bit sorry for themselves, maybe a bit of crying. Same for adults. And you've done this amazing thing, which is the acute illness. You're not completely out of it, because you're probably a bit washed out. You're going to take maybe a few more days blowing out all that gunk. And dealing with the cough. So homeopathy has different remedies for coughs. Some coughs that are dry, some coughs that are worse lying down, some cough remedies that are worse for at night, some cough remedies. This is what's so beautiful about homeopathy. It differentiates in the most exquisite, almost artistic way between one's symptoms. So although I've said this rough threefold journey through an acute illness, there would be other remedies that might well go in there. One of which is gelsemium, which is a beautiful flu remedy when the body goes from the belladonna state into just unbelievably aching pains and joint pains and muscle pains. And that's when you really feel you've got flu and you know it, and you go, oh, just take me now. In fact, flu's quite lovely to have every now and again. Don't have it every year. It's not a good thing at all. But every now and again to have a flu, it's like it takes the sting out of death, because you just go, it's fine. I'm fine. I'll either die or I'll sleep. All of which is a healthy attitude to have, really, to one's illness. And so when you can trust the body is doing its journey, doing its job, it becomes a sort of a beautiful process, being ill. That's why I want people to be ill well, because being ill well means you almost luxuriate in it. You give into it. You're not afraid. You're just noticing your body. And now when I get an illness, when I get an acute illness, I mean, I have been doing homeopathy for about 40 years, but when I get an acute illness, I sort of go through those stages within like one night, sort of 6 hours. I'll have gone through into, I've gone from the aconite to the belladonna to the gelsemium, maybe because I get aching limbs very quickly. I've got out of that. I've noticed the sweat, and then I've gone into making a load of snot. And then next day I'm sort of okay to go to work, but I probably might afford myself a day off. But all this is how we build our adaptive immune system, because each time we get some kind of an illness, whether it's a respiratory virus or a vomiting bug or a norovirus, all these things that we're all supposed to be afraid of. If we're not suppressing it every inch of the way, the body knows exactly how to do it, and we just have to follow and use the indicated or the helpful remedies. Admittedly, homeopathy can sound really complicated because there are so many remedies, but that's why it's good to have a homeopath who can point you to the ones that seem relevant at the time. You can, my patients text me, obviously not in the middle of the night. I'm not going to be answering their texts, but every morning and every evening. And also you become empowered. And as a mother, to become empowered over your children being ill is the most wonderful thing, because you're not running them off to the doctor. My children have never been to a doctor. They don't know that whole experience of sitting, waiting. And I mean, and that's just not what happens. What happens is you're ill. Oh, that's good, darling. You're having, some kind of a developmental change or a leap of some sort. Or you've had a hard time at school and maybe you do need to talk about it. And when you cried a bit, you might say, that boy was really nasty to me last week. And whatever, we don't know, but there will be many reasons that we've become susceptible as adults as well as children. So children who maybe have seen their parents having a massive fight or a row, a healthy child will deal with it by coming down with an illness, so that they get cuddled, they get loved, they get told that they're safe, they get, given time to rest and shake it out, if you like, or heat it out through their body. So you release the chi of the shock. So we have an innate and an adaptive immune system. Our adaptive immune system is the one that learns and understands what antibodies it needs to make. The whole idea that we would constantly suppress and confuse that ancient and beautiful evolutionary sophisticated adaptation is madness. Why would we constantly put a spanner in the works of something that is so genius? And it's because for a long time the systems of medicine that honor and respect that have been sidelined. The witches were burned, the homeopaths were poo-pooed, Hahnemann was airbrushed out of history, etc., etc. And yet we know that there are ancient systems that homeopathy is like a tip of a very ancient system that Hahnemann must have tapped into through all his work. And then you have ancient systems like traditional Chinese medicine that understands qi, that understands the flow and the need for qi to be able to flow, that it doesn't try and suppress it. You have Ayurveda, which understands the separate types of people and bodies and respects each type in its attempts to make itself well. And we do have herbal traditions, of course, that are far closer to our evolutionary our patterns, if you like, in our bodies. Our bodies can respond to those herbs. They've grown and evolved along with us. But petrochemical medicine, which is what I call Western medicine, because it came about really once the petrol industry was up. It was like, oh my God, we can make all these chemicals out of petroleum. And that's so alien to our bodies. You know, it is so other. And it's maybe fine in absolute extremis, but as a front line of medicine during healthy acute illness, it's going to cause havoc down the line, and it's going to cause immune systems that forget which way is up. It's going to cause immune systems that start not knowing what's a friend and what's a foe. It's going to cause immune systems that start attacking themselves, and that is autoimmune. So when you have autoimmune, it's right at the end of the immune system constantly having been stopped, suppressed, spanner in the works, whatever, however you want to describe it, until the point when it's so exhausted and it's so lost its way that it doesn't know what's friend or foe. It's not only Western medicine that can do this, of course, because also trauma can cause an immense amount of confusion in the body because of the way that the mind and the body have to adapt to trauma. But so often trauma is treated then by Western medicine, which then puts another layer of confusion and suppression, like antidepressants or psychotics, or all these medicines that are psychiatric medicines that then cause havoc on the mental level. So just quickly to end, homeopathic understanding of health is that the body is the last port of call for discharging dis-ease, if you like, and that our dis-ease mostly comes from our thinking. And when our thinking or our thoughts have gone awry or we've had trauma, it will come down. When we start to heal, it should naturally come down onto the emotional level. So we're more likely to be able to express emotion, grieve, cry, whatever. When we've done that, and the body will move it out to the physical level, and we will often have a skin eruption or some kind of an illness. And as long as we're not suppressing on each level, it will come out, down and out. And that's how the body finds its way back into balance, because the body is just like everything else in nature. It's always seeking equilibrium. And our illnesses are just a way of seeking equilibrium. And in a way, even if we think we know COVID was man-made and they certainly made a lot of money on it, was very useful for a few people, it's still a learning process, and something that people can strengthen themselves against any viral or acute bacterial situation, because the body does want to learn, and it does want to overcome and overthrow, if you like. And that's why that action that I make there, that is the vitality that you need in a body that is seeking equilibrium over and above a virus or a bacteria. And that's the vitality that we want to engender. And that's the vitality you get from vital medicine or vibrational medicine, because that's the vitality that allows your body, your essence, your essential chi to overcome the obstacles that are in its way. until such point as it no longer does, and then we're ready to go off the planet anyway. We have to accept that. But hopefully not until we're about 110, healthy, vibrant, and feisty, let's hope.